week 8, which is where we are right here. So you can download this PSD just to kind of follow along if you would like. And so I'm going to show 2 things here. So this is that PSD, and I'm going to open it in Photoshop. And so my general plan here for my character is I'm going to rig this character. I'm going to take this illustration and use it as a reference. And then I'm going to use shape layers in After Effects to construct the character himself. So you don't really need Photoshop or Illustrator for this. But I think it's good to kind of set yourself a roadmap like this. So you can see right here, I have the character. So this was my the initial sketch, and then found some line work here. And let's see here. And then this layer right here, I start to kind of break down how I'm going to divide up the character, and then I label it. And we can see right here, if we zoom in on some of these parts right here. So let's just take this arm, for example. You'll see I have these dotted lines and then these plus signs right there. And so a dotted line generally is going to indicate where a shape layer is going to end. You know how so when I'm drawing the shape layer for the arm, I'm going to draw it out right there and then draw it around where the line is. So that dotted line is indicating that component. And then these plus signs I've drawn them in to illustrate where the anchor point is likely going to be for that spot here. And so I'm just kind of thinking about, for this arm, I think the anchor point is going to be right where that plus sign is right there. And same for this back arm right here. And so whatever planning you can do in your drawing right here, it might make your life a little bit easier when you're setting things up in shape layers. And we can see right here that this character, and it depends how much animation that you want to be able to do on the character right here, but at least according to this initial map, I have leg 1, leg 2 down here, so that's 2 items. Then I have the main body, so that's 3 items. Then I have the left arm and the right arm, so that's 4 and 5. Then I have the head, which is 6. Then I have the antenna, which could move independently, which is 7 and 8. And then for a cherry on top, I could want to add some finger movement in here. And so those would be some additional layers right there. And you can see that I drew in some plus signs right there for the thumb, where that anchor point might be. And for these fingers right here, you can see a dotted line where I'm kind of drawing in where the anchor point is right there. And so by having a drawing like this, it kind of helps me when I'm working in After Effects. It's less of a creative process, I guess, because that's a rough way of saying it. The roadmap is laid out for you, so you kind of know what you're going to do here. So that's kind of a preview of what the demonstration is going to be here. And one other thing I want to show before we get started is you can construct, if you're comfortable with Photoshop or Illustrator, you can construct your character in Photoshop or Illustrator, import them into After Effects, and then put together your puppet, this exact same way. And the only reason I'm not showing that method is because I just don't have time in this class to show you all how to use After Effects and Illustrator if you haven't used them before.
So the files imported to
Yeah, so what I recommend is saving it as a TIFF should work. A PSD is definitely going to work. So if you can save it as a PSD file. Well, let's try it out. Yeah, so the next part of this demonstration is I'm going to show you what happens when you export your renders out in a layered file and how you can open them in After Effects. And so generally what I would say is when you're saving it, just save it as, if you're in Photoshop, for instance, save it as a Photoshop file. In a Photoshop file, the abbreviation for it is a PSD. And what that's going to enable you to do is you're going to be able to import each of these layers separately into After Effects. And so just as a test, I'm going to export this as a TIFF and just see if that works. So it's like a PSD. It's like an uncompressed file, and it can contain layer information in it, and it's very, very interchangeable with a PSD file. Are you familiar with the PSD file? Is everyone here familiar with what a PSD file is? And it's okay if you're not. Okay, so I'm gonna save this as a TIFF file, just so we see how this goes. So I'm gonna have, oh, whoops. So I'm in Photoshop right now, and I'm gonna save as, let's see here, I'm on my desktop, and I'm just gonna go down to TIFF rather than PSD on this one, and press save. Okay. It's saying including layers will increase file size. That's not a problem here. Okay, so if I open this up in After Effects, so I'm just going to boot up After Effects for a second. Remember, again, kind of my plan for my demonstration is I'm going to construct this whole character using shape layers, but yeah, again, if you want to construct your character in Photoshop, you just want to have your character separated in such a way in Photoshop or Illustrator where the arm has its own layer, the head has its own layer, the body has its own layer, whatever independent components that you want to have move around have the flexibility to be on their own layer and be attached and moved around. And a lot of the times you'll find that there's a little bit of a learning curve to this initial step of setting up a character rig. I think the most common mistake I see people make is they have too many layers merged together, and so you don't have the flexibility to kind of add animation to them. So for instance, if in your illustration your body and then your arms are attached to each other and they're overlapped, you're not really going to be able to animate the arms at that point. So just it kind of it goes from a character to character basis right here, whether it's going to work or not. So hopefully kind of seeing this example will help show what can work and what can't work here. So first, just for the people who want to build their characters entirely in Photoshop or in Illustrator, I'll show you how to import your characters here. So I have just a blank After Effects project here. And I like to just, again, start off with a footage. So I'm just making folders here in my project directory. So footage, images, comps, and then audio. And you can see these folders are getting dragged within each other. So if I close down images, those expand down. So if you don't want that to happen, all you need to do is click on a folder right here and then just drag it out to where it says a plus sign, and it'll go back to the root folder right here. And so these are images that I'm going to import. So I'm gonna try the TIFF. It might work, it might not. I'm actually really not sure. So you go to you select the folder you want it to import into. You go to File, Import, File, and let's see here. I have, here we go. Sorry. I forgot to put, so I'm taking my images and I'm putting them into my project directory right here. They were sitting on my desktop before. And remember, if I dragged them straight off my desktop, if they ever got moved after that point, After Effects would lose the file. So I almost messed up there. So under images, I'm going to do that again, File, Import, File, and I'm going to go under images, and I'm going to try this TIFF right here. So generally speaking, here, I'm going to do the PSD first, just so we can see like that it definitely works here. So I have it under images, and then I have my PSD file of that puppet character. And when you're importing a file, you'll get this window right here. And you always want to enable all acceptable files. I've never really changed that to anything else right there, but you'll see this tab right here is really important. So you can import it as footage. And if you import a PSD, even though a PSD is a layered image file, if you import a PSD as footage, it's just going to come in almost like if it was a JPEG where all of the layers are merged together right there, which can often be really helpful. But if you want to import it so all the layers in your Photoshop composition come through, you just go into either composition and retain layer sizes or composition right here. And I'll show you the difference between these. So I'm going to go down to composition, which is the third one in, and then I'll press open. This window will come in. You want to import it as a composition and editable layer style, so you just kind of don't mess with this folder right here. And so once you get that, so this is the PSD that I opened for this one. So I import it under images, and so it comes in as its own pre-composition, and I can double click that, and we can see that my PSD shows up right here, and you can see each of these layers down here. So I just, you can see right here under images, this folder was blank. and then I imported the Photoshop image as a composition rather than as footage. And so it brought it in as a composition right here. And I double clicked on the composition to bring up the composition. And it also has this folder down here where if I expand the folder, you can see that I have each of the Photoshop layers separated right here. And so if you've created your character in Photoshop or Illustrator, you can just import it that way. And at that point, when it comes time to rig your characters, you're just taking your independent layers and then finding your anchor points and cropping them out right here. And so in this one, I imported the composition normally, and it kind of kept everything in proportion in the same spot as it was in Photoshop. Whenever you do it this way, it'll kind of just come in the way it looks in Photoshop right here. And alternatively, so I'm just going to press edit undo a few times. And if instead I went to file, import file, and then found my file right here. And so I did composition before. And if I do composition and then retain layer sizes right here, so I'm going to do retain layer sizes and open it. It's going to be a little similar, but the difference right here is, if you can see right here, if I solo each layer right here, and this is going to be more drastically true if you've cropped your character into like an arm, like if you separated out the arm and the hand and all this stuff. But you can see it beginning to be illustrated right here, where you see how this when I solo the line art layer right here, that the box goes directly around that layer of drawing right there. So After Effects will pretty much automatically detect the edge of your layer in terms of what you drew into it and scale it to that point. Meaning, how do I say this clearly? So you can see right here that if I were to grab the handles and scale this right here, that the handles are right there. And if I import the composition normally, the handles would be out here at the edges of the composition right here. So that's the simple difference between those two things right there. So when creating a character, you can kind of do all of your construction in another program, import it into After Effects and use After Effects solely as an animation device right here. So one thing I want to test, I want to just see if the TIFF file can work. I recommend doing PSDs if you can do them, but I'm going to try the TIFF file. It doesn't let me import it as a footage. I'm going to create a composition from it. Let me try it again. The TIFF file didn't work the first time. And let me try once more. Okay, yeah, so yeah, the TIFF files don't necessarily work for this process. So you want to try to get your file into a PSD. If you've worked in another program, what I would recommend doing is opening it in Photoshop and then exporting it out of there to get it layered up. Most programs should be able to do that. So for this demonstration here, I'm just going to go to images and I'm just going to import this, because initially this drawing that's been constructed right here, I simply have it as a reference because I'm going to use shape layers to draw this thing out. So I'm just going to import it as footage. And when you import it as footage rather than a composition right here, so I'll just go up to footage right there and press OK. It comes in as a flat layer right here. And let's see here. And I can just drag it. If I want to create, so I don't have any compositions right now in my scene. So if I just take, even if it's a flat layer and I drag it into my timeline, it's going to create a composition based off of the image size that your Photoshop file was created at. So all I did was I took my Photoshop file, dragged it down here, and it created a new composition automatically. I'm going to take this composition and drag it into my comps folder just so I can stay organized. And I'm just going to call this Puppet Demo version 1. And whenever you kind of start working, you want to make sure that you're working at a good resolution here. So this is super important. Is so starting this out, I'm just going to go up to composition settings right here. And you can see that this is 4K. So it's 4096 by 4096, which is definitely going to be good enough right here. I could get away with making this smaller. So you can see that when this is checked, it locks the aspect ratio. So right now it's at 4K. And I think I can get away with this being 2K. So if I just type in 2048, which is half the number, and that's the 4K dimension right there. You can see it locks the dimension right there, so it stays consistent. The frame rate's good. I do not need this to be 30 seconds per se, so I'm going to make this 20 and press OK. And so the composition's set up right there. And remember, the puppet is, we're going to take this puppet composition and we're going to put it into the HD composition. So this is going to be, in the end, it's going to be a composition inside of a composition. And so I have this set up as 2K. You can see that my drawing is too big for the composition right now. And so all I need to do is I can either press S or I can expand this out and then go down to scale right here and just type in 50% just to bring this down to the right dimensions right there. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to lock this right here and get started on constructing a puppet. So again, to construct a puppet out of this, I'm going to be using shape layers, and you can see I've marked each kind of step that I will eventually do right here. So I'm probably going to start with something like the arm right here. And I think for this character right here, even though I drew the character with outlines, I'm going to have the character be, my plan right now is for the character to have just be a solid color character without outlines on them. So to start things off, and this should hopefully be some familiar techniques to everybody. And I'm going to be using my mouse, so hopefully this goes okay right here. Is I'm going to be creating shape layers. So you can see my reference image is locked. And then I'm going to go up to layer, new, and then shape layer right here. And remember, when you create a new shape layer, it creates a blank layer, so there's nothing in it. And remember, when you're creating a shape layer, you can start off with either this button right here, where you can create a rectangle around a rectangular, or an ellipse, which might be helpful when we get to the eyes or something like that, for instance. We can use the pen tool, which is what I'm going to be using a lot right here, where you manually draw it in. And then we have this button over here where we can kind of create some preset items right there within the shape layer. And so what I'm going to be showing a lot of today is the pen tool. And so the pen tool, if you click it and expand it, there's some different options in here. The shortcut for it is G. And so whenever you see an icon up here and there's a little arrow in the bottom right, that means you can expand it out for subtools that are within it. And the main tools I'm going to be concentrating on are the standard pen tool, where you're drawing it out. We have the add vertex tool, which helps us add an anchor point, and we can subtract an anchor point with either of these two right here. And then finally, the convert vertex tool allows you to adjust the Bezier handles on the pen tool, so you can adjust the shapes after the fact with this tool right here. And so I'm going to start off with the pen tool right here. And essentially what you'd want to do with a pen tool is you want to start at a point and you want to draw out a shape, and then you want to reach the closing point at the end and kind of tie it off, is the main idea right here. And essentially with a pen tool, this should be familiar to anyone who's used Illustrator a lot. And I think some of the shortcuts might be slightly different, but it's the same general concept, where with a pen tool, so we're going to draw it and we're going to create some kind of loop, some finished shape, and then close it off at the end. And so with the pen tool, you can click and drag and you get these Bezier handles right here. So that's one option you have, or you can just tap and create points without the Bezier handles. So that's kind of the first decision you're faced with when using a pen tool. And the more you use it, the more natural it's going to start to feel here. And remember, once you've drawn it out, these other subtools that I showed you, you can use it to adjust it. So these are very editable, and you can kind of change them after the fact really easily after you've drawn them in. So I'm just pressing Command Z to get back to the original point. And so just to show you as I draw something out right here, so I'm clicking and holding. So I'm clicking and holding to get these Bezier handles. And you can see as I drag right here that the direction this handle is going is manipulating the shape that it's making right here. One super helpful shortcut here that's really important is if you hold spacebar, it allows you to kind of change the anchor point once you've already drawn it. So I'm holding down normal click and I'm holding down spacebar, and it's letting me change my anchor point after the fact right here. So a lot of times you'll draw and you'll be like, oh shoot, that anchor point's a little wrong. So if you hold down spacebar, it allows you to kind of adjust it here as you're continuing to go. And then I'm letting go of spacebar and just kind of changing my Bezier handle again right here. And generally the concept that I recommend doing with this is trying to learn how to use this tool with as few Bezier handles as you can, or as few anchor points as you can. And the reason for that is if you have a lot of anchor points in here and you're spending a lot of time drawing in a lot of points, you're going to end up with a pretty wavy looking character. And if that's your design, then that's great. But like a lot of the times, you know, for like this character design, for example, he's constructed of simple shapes that should only require about 4 anchor points per shape right here. So you can see right here, if I zoom in on this, I haven't closed off my final anchor point yet. And so if you see where my cursor is, a little dot shows up when I hovered over the initial anchor point where I first started drawing. A little dot shows up in the bottom right side of my cursor. And that's an indication that you're kind of reached your first anchor point and you can close off your shape right here. So I just click and you can close it off right there. And so to adjust the shape that you've created right here, remember we have these tools under here. So you can press G and you should be able to cycle through them right here if you want, but I honestly find it easier just to click and just find the anchor point that you want to use. So the first one right here is add an anchor point. So adding an anchor point is the second one down. And it allows me just to look anywhere on the shape right here. And if I just say like, hey, I want an anchor, I want another anchor point right here. I just press the pen tool with a plus on it, find that point that I want to add on the shape, and then I click right there, and it automatically adds an anchor point. And then it also automatically creates a Bezier that matches the shape that was already there. So whenever you add anchor points, it shouldn't change your shape, your initial shape, and it just gives you another handle where you can kind of make adjustments to this thing. And so you can see right here, the Beziers are relatively long handles, so it's a rounded shape that's being formed right there. If I grab the Beziers and then I bring them to a smaller point right here, you see how it turns into a sharper point right there. And if you want it to be a totally sharp point and you want to get rid of these Bezier handles, this is where this tool comes in. So I'm clicking on the pen tool one more time. I'm going to the second to the bottom. It's called Convert Vertex tool right here. And this is a really helpful tool to kind of change your Bezier handles. So it's the fourth tool from the top. And so it looks like, it should look like a little, let's see if I hover it over the thing, it should just be upside down V essentially. And if I click on the anchor point, it deletes the Bezier handles right there. So that's essentially what this tool does right here is whenever you have some Bezier handles and you're thinking, I don't want them anymore, you can just click onto the pen tool, go down to the fourth one right here to the Convert Vertex tool. You can click on it and it'll convert it into a sharp point right here. Alternatively, if you have a sharp point and you want to add Bezier handles into it, that same tool does the same thing. So using the same tool on a sharp point, I can click on it and it creates the Bezier handles right there. So if you ever have Bezier handles that you want to get rid of, or you have an anchor point where you want the Bezier handles, that's where this tool mainly comes in handy right here. And then finally, I'm not really going over the last tool here because we don't really need it. We have the subtract anchor point tool, which is probably what you would imagine it would be, which if you just click on an anchor point, it should, here we go, it deletes it. So if you want to kind of get rid of anchor points that already exist, you just press the minus tool and you can delete out anchor points right here. Let's see here. Finally, just under the shape layer right here, you can see that the color is green right here. So if you ever want to change the color, you go up here to the fill and you can choose different colors. So you change the color up here. And I could add a stroke to it if I wanted to. So if I wanted like a black stroke going around it right there, I just go under stroke and click it so that there's the color that you want right there. And you can select the stroke width right here. So you can have it be a thin stroke. And you see there's a number attached to it. So if I do have a stroke around my character, I just want to keep this number consistent for most of my character. So if I type in 4, I want that to remain consistent. If you have a stroke that you want to get rid of, you just click on where it says the word stroke on it, and you'll get this box right here. And you'll usually want this if you want to stroke, the second box right here. We have some options where we can add gradients to the stroke. And if you don't want a stroke, you just click on this, the one on the left that's a red diagonal line, and that's no stroke right there, and it just goes to a simple shape layer right there. You can also do that exact same thing for the fill layer. So for the fill layer, I can click on where it says fill. I can press none if I just want to be able to see my drawing underneath it, for instance. I can just click on, I can select the shape. I can go up to where it says fill and click on the word fill, click on it, and then choose none right there. You can also choose a solid color, and then we can kind of get into gradients, which I'll kind of show later right here. And so that is essentially how you draw a shape with the pen tool. Does anyone have any questions for me on the pen tool before I kind of show how I'd start to kind of break this character up right here? Yes.
Now, if we're putting joints in these kinds of arm things,
Uh-huh.
if you like extend the arm a little bit into the socket,
Mhm.
that if it bends it like does it just show blank?
Yeah, so that's yeah, there's kind of like it's a skill that kind of takes a little practice to get used to right here. So it kind of, you want to be sure to kind of lean on giving yourself a little more handle, to work with here. This particular character, I know that this arm right here is going to hinge around somewhere around this point. This is kind of my guesstimate where I drew it in right there. And so that'll work there. But you can see if you look up at the screen, Alice, on the screen that's behind them, you can see that it looks like if I were just looking at the drawing without just the black outlines, that the arm would end right here. But you can see it's going behind the character. So I have this dotted line indicating that I'm kind of bringing it into the character so that when it rotates from this point, it won't show up, from underneath there. Yeah. So yeah, that's an important thing to be thinking about while you're working on this. And so, yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, absolutely. And so before I begin drawing my shapes, you can either start with, there's kind of two ways I recommend doing this. You can either, I like to either set the color like this. So I have my fill color set to like a green color. And then on my shape layer, I can just go under transform and set my opacity down to like 45% or something like that. And so that way I can see my drawing underneath it as I'm drawing. That's kind of the main way I would recommend doing it, is just, so just to kind of walk through our process right here, as I would go to layer, new shape layer right here. And the first thing I would do is I click it open, go down to transform and change the opacity down to 50 or 45% or so right here. And yeah, I can see my fill is going to be this kind of turquoise color right here. And then just go to my pen tool. And when I start drawing things in, you can see since the opacity is at 45, I can still see my drawing underneath there. If you don't want to do it that way, you could also set your fill to be none up here, and that would also work. But it is helpful to have visibility of your drawing while you're working, because if this opacity is at 100% and you're trying to draw your shape, it can be a little confusing, and they're not being able to see your reference drawing right there. So I recommend having it at about 45%. And you can see right here the shape. So I just drew that shape in real quick, and that's not a shape I'm going to want to keep. So if you want to delete a shape that you've already created, you can see that under the shape layer right here, I have the transform tab, which has the controls that we worried about with the pendulum, like things like opacity, rotation, and scale. But there's also this other menu right here called contents. And you can see right here under contents, there's this subtab called shape. If I click that open, we have the path right here. So the path is that path that I drew in right there. We have the stroke, which is not existent on this particular thing because it turned the stroke off, but I could click open stroke and give it a stroke through these settings right here and adjust some of the settings of the stroke, like give it dashed lines and things like that. Then we have the fill. And so I could change my fill color down here under this menu as well as up here. So there's kind of two places you can change the fill color right there. So the fill color can be changed right here, and you can make adjustments to its opacity as well. And this opacity is independent right here of the overall opacity of the layer right here. So you can see I have like a 20% opacity on my shape, but then again, kind of stacked on top of it on the overall layer, I have a 45% opacity. So just keep in mind, this can get a little confusing, is that you kind of have two opacity controls in here. And if you draw in a shape that you don't like, you just go under contents, you find the shape right here, and you can just delete, and you still have your shape layer, but you've gotten rid of that particular shape that I've just drew. So I have my shape layer at 45%. I'm going to click on my pen tool right here, and I'm just going to draw on this first arm. So I'm going to start up here, and I'm going to click and drag like this. And you can see this direction that I'm holding my anchor points right here, or sorry, my Bezier handles. I'm going to try to draw this. I'm going to attempt to draw this just with 4 anchor points right here. So I'm going to the elbow right here. I'm going to click it, and I'm just clicking and holding it and just dragging it. And remember, you have the space bar, so you can kind of readjust. You can see that this is giving me a preview of where the line's going to end up going on this thing. And remember, I can change these Bezier handles after the point right here. So I'm using a long Bezier handle for the elbow right here because I'm trying to do this with as few points as possible. I'm clicking here at the end of the hand right here to create this anchor point. And I might need to have two up here. So one for the upper wrist right here. And so again, I'm holding down the main click button on my mouse. And then I'm holding down spacebar to reposition my anchor points here. So a lot of the time you'll see me drawing an anchor point. Then I'll realize I want to shift it and just hold down spacebar and reposition the anchor point as I'm drawing right here. And then I'll just I'll see if I can close this off. So I'm just going to go back to my original anchor point up here and draw it in. And there's a chance that I might need to draw in more anchor points, but I'm at least attempting to draw it with as few anchor points as I can initially. So I just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 anchor points right here. And so from here, I can just press V and I can kind of grab these Bezier handles right here and continue to make adjustments to my shapes right here, just to kind of try to get my shape right. So you can see I'm changing my anchor points and changing my Bezier handles right here to get this thing lined up. So you can see me, sometimes I'm clicking on the anchor point, which is the center point right here. And sometimes you'll see me clicking on the Bezier handles where I'm kind of changing the shape of the path in between anchor points right there. So you can see right here, and I'll just make one more change. So I have the arm drawn in right here. So this can work as the arm. Really important when you're rigging your character is, so I'm going to make a new shape layer for each independent shape right here. So I have the arm, right now it's called shape layer 1. I'm just going to click on it and press return and call this arm 1 right there. And actually, I think the way I have this, this one's going to be called arm 2, just because that's how I have it drawn out in my drawing right there. And I'll just take the opacity and I can bring it back to 100%, or I can just leave it at 45 right here. And I'm just going to continue to kind of make these different shapes right here for the character. Before I move on to the next shape though, what I like to do, and this is a super important step here, is you can see my anchor point is right here on the character. Remember the shortcut I showed you all was Y before, and it's this button right here. And this lets you shift the anchor point of any layer in After Effects. So you can either press Y or this button right here. And with the shape layers before, we were holding, I was holding Command, and you can see you can snap it to these different edges right here. But for this organic character, I don't really need that Command shortcut to snap it to the center or snap it to the edges right here. So I'm just holding down Y, and I'm finding the anchor point that I drew in on my character right here. So my guesstimate was the anchor point should go somewhere around this point right here. So I just pressed Y and shifted my anchor point right to there. And now when I select the arm and I go to rotate, and I rotate the arm, you can see that when I rotate the arm this way and that way, that it kind of feels like it's more or less connected to the shoulder blade. I might make some small adjustments to it here or there, but that's like pretty close right there. And so we have his left arm, and I'm calling it arm 2 right here. So generally speaking, the way that I'm labeling things here is on the left, I'm going to call it either arm 1 or leg 1, and then on the right it'll be arm 2, leg 2. That's kind of my system for just keeping things organized here. So next up, I just want to show the thumb here, because this is going to introduce us to some of the concepts here of rigging by, and this is going to be a technique that should be familiar to everybody. We're going to parent the thumb to the arm. And so that way, when the arm moves, the thumb's going to move with it, but we can also move the thumb independent of it right here. So to create the thumb, and this is a really important step that might trip some people up here, is I need to make sure that I go up to layer, and then I make an entirely new shape layer for the thumb right here, right? So I went to layer, new shape layer, and it's going to create a new blank shape layer. I'm going to press return on it so that I can rename it. And I'm going to call this thumb 2 right there. And I'm going to use the pen tool again, and I'm going to draw in this thumb right here. And so I'm just going to go pen tool. I'm going to try to do this with 4 points right here. I might actually be able to get this done with just 3 points. Let's see if I can do that. So maybe if I start, I'll start right here. 1, 2, 3, and then, yeah, all I need is 3 anchor points to essentially draw this in right here. So from here, if I want to make some adjustments, I can just click on it, change these Bezier handles right here to extend them out. And notice again that I kind of drew this out with as few anchor points as I could right here. And so I have the thumb. I'm just going to shift the color of it. I have not done any color planning on my character quite yet. I'll give it like a blue thumb right here. And so right now, if I press V or go back to my main selection tool and I click on the thumb, the anchor point is up here in the center of my composition. So I need to do the same thing as I did before, where I press Y or press this button up here. Then I click on the anchor point and then I drag it down to where I think it needs to go. For the thumb, I might click this open and go down to the bottom where it says opacity. I'll type down 45 again. And you can see this plus mark is where I kind of drew in where I thought the anchor point might be. So I'll just move the anchor point there. And when I go to rotate the thumb, you can see it kind of moves kind of the way I want it to move right there. And so right now, let me just take the opacity on both of these and just bring them all the way up to 100 right here. You can press T as a shortcut just to go straight to the opacity right here. And so right now, if I rotate the arm, you can see it rotates, but the thumb doesn't. So remember, for this rig, this is going to be, I showed you all some kind of complicated rigs that you can do in After Effects, but we're just going to create this rig using a parenting system. And so that's going to stay pretty simple technically, you know, in terms of like the technical aspects in After Effects here. So all I need to do is I'm going to parent the thumb to the arm right here. And if you don't see these controls up here, so I'm going to be using the parenting controls, which is the spiral right here. And if you don't see those by any chance, you should see them almost no matter what right here. Yeah, even if this After Effects menu is shrunk down to its most minimal settings right here, you should be able to see it. But if at any point you want to see some of these tabs and you can't, it's just these icons down here in the bottom left will kind of bring up some of these controls right here. So if for instance, you can see the opacity, you know, just look down here and that's the fix for that. So I'm going to attach the thumb to the arm. And so all you have to do for that is I just click on the spiral that's connected to the thumb. I click it and hold it, and then I just drag it down to where the arm is right here and let go. And now when I rotate the arm, the thumb is now attached to it right there. And it's really that simple. If I want to unattach it, I just click on this tab right here, this next to the spiral, so directly to the right of the spiral, and I just go to none right there. And now it's not parented to anything. And when I rotate the arm, it's loose again. So it's really easy to parent things and unparent them and just kind of keep things moving right here. And for the rest of this character, it's going to be, at least for the initial setup phases, as I kind of build out the arms and the legs and the body, it's going to remain this simple right here. One thing I would say right now is this character, I'm using a simple parenting system right here where the arm's not going to bend on this one. The arm is just going to rotate around the shoulder right there. So I'm kind of keeping a simple system right here. If you want a system where you can bend the arm, like physically bend it, you're going to have to use something called the puppet tool here. And with the puppet tool, what you need to do is you need to kind of do this a little bit differently if you want to use it. So again, for the rest of this character, I'm going to kind of build this out this way, but I want to show you all how to use the puppet tool if you want to use the puppet tool for an arm. So if I were to use the puppet tool on this, I'm just going to build this out. I'm going to go to layer, new, shape layer right here. I'm going to call this, I'm going to, oops, click on it, press return so I can rename it. I'm going to call this puppet arm. And so I have an empty shape layer and I just named it puppet arm. And then I'm going to do the pen tool and I'm going to draw this out exactly the same way as I did before. Oops, I forgot to change the opacity, but that's okay. I'll just kind of go by eye on this. Let's see. You can also press edit undo if you kind of took a wrong step and you realize you need more to kind of change what you're doing with your anchor points here. So I have my pen tool right there and I drew that in. And let's say that I want this character to have fingers. So before I kept the thumb on its own separate layer. This time I'm putting the thumb on the same layer right here. And so I'm just going to do the pen tool right here. And I'm staying within the same puppet arm layer. So before I kind of separated out into two layers, this time I'm keeping it all in the family right here with one layer here in order to use the puppet tool. And so, and I can even, with the thumb selected, these, if I click on the puppet arm and I go under contents, you can see I have shape 2 right here, which is the thumb. Shape 1 is the arm, and I could even rename these. So I could call this arm shape, you know, if you want to stay organized right here, and I'm just pressing return. Thumb shape right here.
Good habit to get into, because if you like work on something and then come back to it later and you don't know what anything is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's a really good point. Is like, notice how meticulous I'm being about naming everything here. Is once this character is rigged, you know, there's going to be a, you know, at least 16 layers going on here, and if they're not named, it's going to be really hard to figure out what you were doing, you know. So just get in the habit of naming things right here. And so you can see right here that I have the thumb shape right here. I can go under fill if I want this to be a different color, click on the fill. And so even though those shape layers, or sorry, this is all one single shape layer right here that I've created, you can still have multiple colors going on in the same shape layer. And the reason I'm keeping it as one layer right here is I'm going to use a puppet tool, and it's going to create anchor points within the arm. And the puppet tool is kind of speaking to whatever is contained within this layer right here. So the way the puppet tool works is, and so I'm kind of showing you kind of 2 ways you can build the arm. So way 1 was through parenting, which is the first way, and this way is going to be the puppet technique. And so the puppet tool is right here. It's this button right here. It's like a little pinpoint. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create pinpoints that are the handles, or the joints, I should say, in the arm right here. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to just create 3 joints on this. I'm just going to create a shoulder joint, an elbow joint, and then a wrist right here. And so I'm just, I have my puppet arm layer selected right here. I'm going to start with the shoulder, going to go to the elbow, then go down to the wrist right here. And with shape layers, as long as you're working with shape layers, this is going to be really easy, pretty much. It's just a matter of staying organized with it. So I have the puppet arm right here. And so let's say that I want to animate this thing. So I'm going to close down my contents tab. And you can see right here, it made this new tab called effects. So I used the puppet tool. I just drew those 3 anchor points onto my shape layer. It created this effects tab right here with puppet underneath it. And if I open up puppet, it looks like this. And I have to open up one more time and go under, let's see here. Sorry, I lied. Several more times. And we're going to just kind of keep opening it up here. So I went under effects, under puppet, then there's mesh, then finally deform. That's one thing I don't like about this, is it's nested under too many submenus right there. That's like kind of annoying. But you can see right here that there's 3 keyframes initially created right there, the first keyframe right there. So if I were to animate this character's arm, let's just go to 1 second in right here. So I'm just dragging it to 1 second in. So I can click on each of these puppet pins, and it highlights, I don't know if you can see this, but so I'm clicking on puppet pin 2 right here, and it highlights full yellow right there. And so it's an empty circle if it's not selected, and it turns into a full circle if it is. So if I were to animate this, I wouldn't animate the shoulder joint at all. And I would just animate either pin 2 or pin 3. And notice that it goes in the order that you clicked them in. So I always start with the anchor point that is starting from the base of your character and then move out. Notice how I started with the shoulder and then I built further away from the character. And so pin 3 is the hand. And so if I click on that pin, you can see right here, you can see I can move this character's whole arm right here.
Very noodly.
Yeah.
At least from what I've seen, it kind of causes characters to look a little wonky if it's like something very detailed in the arm gradient.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of like there's pros and cons to each of these techniques right here, right? So like this one right here, if I'm ever using the puppet tool, I am trying to kind of keep it relatively simple, but you can see if you set up the joints correctly, there's like some fluidity here, you know, that happens. So there's kind of like some added fluidity that happens. And also notice that the thumb is I think, in my opinion, the main constraint of using the puppet tool is I had to attach the thumb to the actual shape layer right here. I can't really do that technique I did before where the thumb is moving independent. So if I want the thumb and the fingers to move independent of the arm, I need to use the parenting system. If it's okay with me, if the hand stays still and I just want to have more fluidity or noodliness in the arm, then you want to go with the puppet tool right here. So it's kind of, it's a give or take, and it's really up to you. Both of those techniques kind of work for the arms, and it just kind of depends on your character and how you want them to move here. And so yeah, one thing as well is with the puppet tool, one last thing I didn't show is you can see that the anchor point is over here. And I want to do the same thing I did before with the puppet, or sorry, with the parenting version, where I just press Y and then I move the anchor point over here. And so that makes it so that when I attach this arm to the body, that its anchor point is, you know, where I want it to go, so that this puppeted arm can still kind of fit into the right place right there. And notice that these keyframes are generated whenever I move the puppets, and just same as before when you're animating, if I want to get, I kind of created those keyframes just to test out the movement right here. And if I want to get rid of them, you just select them like that, press delete, and then it goes back to its initial position right there. Does anyone have any questions about what I've shown so far? Yes.
Can I explain to the friends the create the anchor points down at like 40 to like playing the shape too much?
The main advice I would have on that is just to be careful with how you move those pinpoints, you know, in order to keep the arm consistent. So you can notice here, like if I'm animating it from, this is the starting position, and if I want to have, oh, whoops, I'm still in anchor point mode. And if I want to move the arm in right here, you can see that it creates, if we zoom in on this, it creates a path right here. And so you can just try to just visually with your eye measure the path and think to yourself, all right, this is the shoulder, is the length from this pinpoint to that shoulder the same as this point, you know, this, to, you know, to keep the arm consistent. And I can kind of move the elbow to make adjustments to it right here and try to kind of work to keep it as consistent as possible. So the main thing is to keep it, to do it by eye within this system. If you want it to, there's not really anything that I know of, like any expressions or anything that I can write into the code that tells After Effects, hey, I'm going to move these pinpoints around and you have to keep the length consistent between them. You know what I mean? So I don't, there might be one, but I'm not aware of it in terms of something that you can write into After Effects for it to automatically keep the lengths consistent between joints. Yeah, and so one thing to keep in mind too, and we haven't really gone into the paths too much right here, is so when I select this point right here, I have this path right here. And so when you animate characters, yeah, a lot of the times these paths will be created right here. And this is just telling us we have the velocity of the keyframes, which you get by clicking the graph editor. Remember when we were kind of messing with the graph editor to change the curves there? And so that's one set of curves. But then there's another set of curves that is that refers to, let's see here, the path that the keyframes are moving from one position to the next. So right now, this animation, you can see the anchor point is just traveling as the bird flies right here from point 1 to point 2 right here, like that. And if I want the curve to change, we have the anchor points right here. So first anchor point or keyframe, second anchor point or keyframe. And I can click these Bezier handles, very similar to when I was creating shape layers. And let's just say I want the path to go like way out this way or something. I just grab these Bezier handles like this. And so now when the points animate, it goes along that curve right there. So you can use those Beziers to help either exaggerate your movements or as a tool to try to keep your paths consistent so that the volume of the arm appears to, you know, remain consistent here. Let's see here. Yeah, that's a good question. Does anyone else have any questions on what I've shown so far? Yes.
Can you parent puppet?
Yes, yes and no. So what I can't do, or let me rephrase this. I might need to look into this. There might be a complicated way that I can parent something to this anchor point right here, or this pinpoint right here. I'll need to look into that some more. But that is very tricky at a minimum. And if I want the fingers to move independently, I recommend going with the parenting tool for rigging. But I can have this arm parented to the body right here. So it's very easy to parent this arm to the body. And I can have this character's arm animate like this. So I have the puppet tool animating the arm right there. And sometimes you'll see these little, so one thing to look out for when you're using the puppet tool is, oops, you can see it broke up my shape right there. So just be on the lookout for that. If that happens, sometimes you have to just kind of start it over, which is unfortunate. I was hoping that wasn't going to happen right there. And that shouldn't be happening with shape layer. So I'll need to kind of look into that more and problem solve for that one. But that's a quick aside right there. The arm itself, I can parent to the body. And so if the character walks, this arm will move with it. And it's just a matter of parenting the finger to the arm. Gets a little trickier with the puppet tool. So I would say, generally speaking, the parenting tool is a lot more straightforward in terms of like, you're not going to get any glitches with it or anything like that. And you'll have added manipulation you can do with the fingers and things like that. I could also have this arm divided into a shoulder and then an elbow, you know, and just construct it out of two different shapes so that I can get that full mobility in that arm right there using the parenting tool. And there's going to be less glitches and there's more customization you can do. And, but what the puppet tool has is just that the ability to kind of have fluid movement a little bit more, you know, so that's kind of the give and take between those two things. For most of your character, I would really recommend doing the parenting tool for most of it, especially like for this character, I would probably do this character entirely using the parenting tool. And if I were to use the puppet tool on this character at all, it would be on the arms, you know, but like the head, I wouldn't mess with it, you know. For most of your character rigs, the majority of the time I'd be using the parenting tool to rig. And there's always, I mean, everybody's rig is going to be totally different from one another. So it's hard for me to give you like a cookie cutter, like this is exactly how you're going to rig your character kind of instructions. Cause you know, someone might be animating a character like this, and then the next character might be animating a snake, you know, that's just going to be entirely different in terms of what you're going to do here. So let's see here. It's 1:04 right now. And what I'll do here for the rest of the class here is let's go ahead and take our 15-minute break. And then when we get back on the screen here, I'll be continuing to build this character so you can kind of see how I'm doing it. But I'm going to give you all time to work on your own, you know, and you can ask me questions and yeah, we can kind of go from there. Does anyone have any questions before we break?